of how many people, how many hours you're doing. That is.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Philip Beard and Deborah Hammond. Deborah Hammond taught in the Hutchins School of Liberal Arts, or School of Liberal Studies from 1996 to 2017, with a focus on environmental and social justice issues. Among other upper division seminars, she taught one on money matters and has long been interested in the potential of public banks to support more sustainable and more equitable social systems. Since her retirement, she has been involved with community initiatives focused on Indigenous rights and fossil fuel divestment. In addition to her work with Friends of Public Banking Santa Rosa. I would also like to introduce Philip Beard. Philip Beard taught German and Global Studies at Sonoma State University from 1969 to 2005. Since the early 90s, he has been researching complementary monetary systems as an antidote to poverty, social injustices, and violence. A founding member of Sonoma County Go Local, he co-designed the Go Local book, loyalty currency that created hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of local value during its 10-year lifetime from 2010 to 2020. Now retired, he divides his time between playing trumpet and advocating for the implementation of public banks. Our surest path to ecology, social, and financial prosperity. Please give a warm welcome to Deborah Hammond and Philip Beard.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. So Philip and I are going to be talking about public banks. Obviously, not the most popular topic in this week, but a very important topic. We're going to talk about what public banks are, why they're important, and especially now, and what's happening now, both locally in California and across the nation. So this saying, the best way to rob a bank is to own one, is actually the title of a book by William K. Black. And it's about the, it's about how corporate executives and politicians looted the savings and loan industry back in the 80s. And it's a precursor to the 2008 collapse. And both of those two collapses, crises, resulted from the increasing trend towards deregulation that began in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan.
It began in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan and continued in full force through the 90s. The slide that you see on the upper right is Bill Clinton signing off on a bill that repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which you see on the upper left. The Glass-Steagall Act had been adopted in 1934 by the federal government to prohibit the merging of functions between commercial banks and investment banks. And the idea at the time that Clinton bought into was that we didn't need this separation, and that the depository banks, the commercial banks that we keep our savings in, could very well function as part of the investment scheme banks. And the result was, as you see, the deregulated banks that turned into criminal banks, although they were never prosecuted for their criminality. That all happened in 2008, or right about that. Let's go to the next slide. And the villain of the piece was irresponsible home ownership lending. Subprime, the subprime mortgages. And what you see happening here is borrowers, naive borrowers, saying, I thought I was just borrowing, taking out a mortgage to buy a house, But what actually happened was these unsupportable mortgages, these irresponsible mortgages, got sliced and diced and derivativized to the point where nobody had an overview of the system anymore. Nobody knew where the actual value was. And what happened in 2008 was the crash that initiated what's known as the Great Recession. So that all happened. And it happened because our banking system had been deregulated and had gone corrupt. And so the question is, well, now that's over. Is it going to happen again? Could it? Or what other options do we have besides just going back to the banking system as it existed before the crash of 2008?
Thanks, Bill. So there are a number of consequences from the 2008 recession. The economic collapse, obviously, the stock market plunged. Social services were cut drastically. That one graph in the upper right shows the cuts to funding for education, but you can see the same kind of thing happening across social services. Concentration of wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people. The top 1% now owns more than the bottom 90% combined. An interesting statistic that I thought was significant is the median wealth in 2007 was $120,000. In 2016, with adjusted dollars, is $78,000. So you can see the drop in actual wealth among the average person. Many of you are probably familiar with the Occupy movement. That was an initial reaction to 2008 and the ways in which the Wall Street banks and their fraudulent practices, their speculation, created so much hardship for so many people. So it's like, you know, let's move from Wall Street to Main Street. Very strong movement, partly contributed to the development of an interest in public banking. Another thing that also contributed to growing interest in public banking is the divestment movement. It's divesting from fossil fuels, which was especially accelerated by the confrontation between the water protectors and the Dakota Access Pipeline. So the idea was to divest from banks that were investing in the Dakota Access Pipeline, but then it's become a much stronger movement of divesting from banks that invest in fossil fuels, period.
And also invest in detention centers.
Right, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that, but yeah, but that invest in things that we don't really believe in. So all of that has led to the growing interest in public banks, and it wouldn't be fair to talk about public banks without acknowledging the work that Ellen Brown has done. She is the founder and current chair of the Public Banking Institute, and there's a lot of resources on their website if you want to look them up. She's written well over 12 books, I think, but the three that are listed up here, I think the most recent is Banking for the People, are all really good references on public banking. So what is a public bank? A lot of people ask, how is it different than credit unions? How is it different than Wall Street banks? Public banks are operated in the public interest, and they're operated through institutions owned by the people through their respective governments. And while private banks seek short-term profits for their shareholders as their highest priority, public banks return their profits to the general fund, reducing taxes and lowering costs of public projects by as much as 50%. So here's a short video, if I can get it to link. Oops.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
When talking about what public banks are, it's important also to remember what they are not. They're not just a public-owned version of the local neighborhood bank.
Sorry, go ahead.
Where you could go down to cash a check or use the ATM or something like that. Public banks are wholesale banks in the sense that they exist They run their operations primarily through participating community banks. So you as a private citizen don't have your own account in the public bank itself, but the public bank exists in order to promote projects that are that serve the public good.
And this little video kind of.
Decided they want a park. The city council agrees the park is a great idea. But how will they pay for it? The city.
Can you hear? Good.
Borrowing money, the city has to pay a lot more money to purchase the fees that could double the cost of the park. And that money leaves the city. It goes to Wall Street investors who really don't care about the park or the city at all. This is a bad deal for the city and its residents. There's a much better option. An option that's been proven around the world. A public bank. A public bank is a bank owned by the residents of a city, state, region, or territory. Private Wall Street banks just want to make profits for shareholders. The public banks have a mission to serve the public good. They have to reflect the values and facts of the community. And that makes all the difference. Politicians don't want to be able to their job is to just set it up by listening to the people who are not. Public banks are run by skilled local bankers who know their neighbors. Residents are on the supervisory board. That's not what the bank's doing. Public banks can save communities lots of money. First, they cut out expensive Wall Street, which can be hundreds of millions of dollars a year in a big city. Second, they can lower interest rates on the city's loans, which means there's more money to spend on other projects. Third, their profits go back to the city, not to Wall Street. So a public bank can make money for the city. All this means the people of the city have a lot more money to fund all the things they need, such as bridges, good roads, good schools, renewable energy, affordable housing, lower taxes, and the park that people wanted. They have to fund their own money, and they can build their own future. Join the movement. Find out more, go to publicbankinginstitute.org.
So I love this diagram here. If you follow the circle on the left, on the top, the citizens pay taxes into the state government, and then those funds are deposited into private banks. Very small return comes back to the city. Most of the money is invested in derivatives, other kinds of investments that don't serve the local economy, and nothing comes, they make profits back to the bank. Nothing comes back to the state, nothing comes back to the citizens. With a public bank, starting at the top again, the taxes are paid to the state government. They then put the money in the public bank, which then invests in the local economy. And if you follow across back to the state government, whatever profits come back get paid into the state, so that increases the general fund. And also it creates jobs for the people, it helps lower taxes. So it keeps the money in the system, and it works, it works to kind of as a self-reinforcing economic engine. So I'm going to turn it back over to Philip.
So why are public banks a good idea? Well, there are various approaches you can take to answering that question. I want to start with just a quote from a woman named Sylvia Chi, who is a very strong member of the California Public Banking Alliance. And what she has to say about the ultimate purpose of public banks is this. Quote, what we're really looking at or looking for is a tool to help us have that just transition that is moving the whole community, the whole society from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. So moving from extraction to regeneration. That's the sort of long-term, large-scale view. But looking at the slide on the screen up there, there's a very simple way to put the benefits of a public bank that probably would be much more attractive to local politicians who we're going to be talking about in some length later. That is that that public banks save money. They save governments huge amounts of money because the loans that are made by the public bank can be made at zero or low interest, and whatever interest is charged will be fed back into the bank and back into the community itself, rather than going into the pockets of private investors. So the numbers are pretty amazing. One of our group, whose name is Chris Petlock, he works with the Valley of the Moon Water Agency, and he's their chief financial officer. He's come up with an analysis of the situation with Highway 37 that regularly floods, and it's going to be flooding much more in the future. Looking at how much money it would cost to raise the roadbed. And if you look at it from, and assume that the funding for it is going to come from traditional sources, i.e. bonds, in other words, loans that the government agencies of the 4 counties involved would have to be paying or repaying, they have to repay those loans with compound interest. And the compound interest is charged at market rates, and that means that you end up, by the time you've paid off the whole project, you end up spending twice as much money as the project itself demanded. This is stupid. Anybody who can't see that it makes better sense to have your own bank where you can pay back whatever loans are needed at 0 to low interest as opposed to 4 or 5 or 7% interest, anybody who can't see that shouldn't be in public office. And if they are in public office, then it's time for them to recognize that it's time to save this money. And the way to do it is there are some figures there for how much Santa Rosa and Los Angeles, for example, paid to the banks in fees over recent periods. So then we also have greater control over how our tax dollars are invested, because once again, we have our monies, our government monies that can be invested and are invested regularly in all kinds of places. Don't have to be supporting, often without our knowing it, don't have to be supporting the kinds of industries and the kinds of values that we don't support. So, and finally, protecting our investments from fraud and irresponsible speculation. The private banks do not answer to the public. They should, but they don't. And they engaged in risky practices, and they were responsible for the tanking of the economy in 2008. This will not be possible with public banks that are, whose mission is to serve the public, not to serve private investment, and whose governing structures, and we're in the process of setting this all up around the state, but the governing structures will be far more transparent than is the case with private banks, and open to control by the public at large. So here you see the kinds of activities that are supported by our public funds. Under private banks, which is the left side of the slide, our public investments go into banks that support fossil fuels, gun manufacturers, private prisons, and a volatile stock market. The public side, over on the right side of the slide, shows the public investments going into the green economy, affordable housing, community services, and local business. That sounds like the kind of thing we want to have. This is just an indication of the sorts of things that the big private banks are all engaged in, to one extent or another. You see, in particular, look at JP Morgan Chase, about halfway down the chart. It provides money that supports the civilian, the firearms industry, the tobacco industry, nuclear power companies, Dakota Access Pipeline, and private prisons. This is what happens to our public money. It gets invested via these mega banks into activities and industries that we don't support. And we just allow that to happen typically. Well, it's time to stop allowing that.
If I could just pitch in something here. Santa Rosa used to bank with Wells Fargo, and they decided to move their money, their banking services, away from Wells Fargo because of their fraudulent practices. So they switched, guess what, to Chase. And it's hard. That's one of the reasons for public banking is that it's hard to find a commercial bank that actually embodies the values that we want our money to support. So.
So here again is a breakdown of the how public banks operate versus how private banks operate. Just to pick a few of the points here. Public banks are owned by the people of the state community. Private banks are owned by private parties. Public revenues for public bodies.
Web address to watch the stream. You have to actually.
No, we don't have the paid software thing. Yeah, but you can have a free Zoom account.
Yeah, no, I have a Zoom account
Yeah.
too. I'm not sure the engineer can allow the engineer at the station to go set up a Zoom account. The engineer for dentistry show here is different before the show. And we also have to get the head engineer to be able to.
They can save taxpayers up to 50% on infrastructure projects like bridges, trains, and schools. They can eliminate billions of bank fees for cities and states. They can invest in clean energy and a sustainable economy, support climate change endeavors, and partner with local community banks and credit unions.
So there's currently only one public bank in the United States, and that's the Bank of North Dakota, which recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. There's a lot of public banks in the rest of the world. I think 40% of banks worldwide, and in Germany in particular, and public banks are the way that they're funding a lot of their transition to clean energy. So it's not a foreign idea. It works very, very well. The Bank of North Dakota was established in 1919 by the Nonpartisan League, which was formed by a group of farmers that were frustrated with the predatory practices of the banks and other corporations. So they set up the Bank of North Dakota. The benefits of the Bank of North Dakota, it was the only state to really escape the effects of the 2008-2009 credit collapse. It has the lowest unemployment rate in the US. It has the lowest default rate on its loans. It has more banks per capita because, as Philip was saying, it partners with small banks. So if any of you ever read Yes Magazine, there was recently an article about the Bank of North Dakota and a very teeny tiny bank in a small town that was able to fund the construction of an incredibly new, huge medical center by partnering with the Bank of North Dakota. So there's more banks per capita. Since 2000, they've returned over $400 million to the general fund. They've lowered taxes 7 times, and since 1997, they've contributed $200 million to weather-related disasters. So they really serve the community, which is what a bank really should do. This quote at the top, I think it's great. It says, the bank from the Wall Street Journal, the Bank of North Dakota is more profitable than Goldman Sachs, has a better credit rating than JP Morgan Chase, and hasn't seen a profit growth drop since 2003. The return on equity is 5-something%, about 75 or 70% higher than than Goldman Sachs or Chase. So it has an impressive record. And why is it so profitable? There's no private shareholders. There's no bonuses, fees, commissions. There's no high-paid CEOs. The people who had the banks that were bailed out after 2008 gave their CEOs huge bonuses with our money, with taxpayers' money. There's no advertising. There's a massive deposit debates. All the state funds go into the state bank. They partner with local banks, as we were saying, and savings are passed on to borrowers and communities. And as he was saying, they don't have front offices, so they don't have to pay for ATMs and tellers and bank offices. They just are kind of a central depository bank that supports local banks. So Philip's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening now. He mentioned briefly the California Public Banking Alliance, a law that was passed recently and signed by Governor Newsom on the Public Banking Act, and some current initiatives in San Francisco. There's a lot happening. In fact, I was going to say at the beginning that this is the third year we've done this presentation, and so much has happened in those 2 years. It's really quite impressive. So San Francisco is making a lot of progress. LA, Alameda County, Santa Clara County is now kind of up and running. In Northern California, there's some initiatives here locally, and I should have added San Diego. So I'll take it from there.
Okay, well, the exciting part of the talk comes now, because we've got, something has changed since a year ago, the last time we gave this presentation, and that is the adoption of Assembly Bill 857, Public Banking. It was authored by Chu and Gonzalez, I believe, signed by Governor Newsom last October, which sets up the framework for the chartering of public banks. There have been in California state law no explicit reference to public banks as opposed to other banks. There's all kinds of laws about private banks. But there was some question as to the legality of setting up public banks, even if local venues, local governments wanted to do it. But all of those questions have now been erased by the adoption of this new bill, because it makes very specific what sorts of regulations the public banks are going to be subjected to, what they have to go through in the first place in order to be chartered, and what their mission is. Their explicit mission now is to serve the public good, and that's part of state law. So there's not going to be a public bank that comes into existence that, rather than serving the public good, is actually serving private investors. It can't happen.
So if I could say just a little bit, insert just a little bit here, the California Public Banking Alliance is a coalition of groups, and it was kind of a grassroots get-together of everybody in the state that was working on public banking, and there were 10 cities at the time when it first started, and pretty much they are still the 10 leading cities: Los Angeles, San Francisco, East Bay, Silicon Valley, Santa Rosa, Eureka, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, Orange County, and San Diego. And they actually drafted the bill initially and then worked with Chu and Gonzalez to get it through the legislature. So it's to me, it's a really exciting example of what everyday people can do to bring about change.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable. The charge was led initially, at least, by these folks that call themselves Revolution LA, younger generation activists who are very articulate, very well-grounded in the legalities of banking, and put together this political campaign, basically, that finally resulted, as this slide shows, in Governor Newsom signing the bill. Again, what the bill provides is a legal venue for municipal public banks. The public banks, according to this bill now, will be tax-free. They won't have to pay income taxes. And the support for the idea that was initially pitched by Revolution LA, but then was jumped onto by groups all over the state, really, but the largest and most active groups were in San Francisco and East Bay, that is Alameda County, Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond. We had our own small version of it here in Sonoma County, and we're called the Friends of Public Banking Santa Rosa, although our venue now has grown beyond Santa Rosa. But I'll tell you a little bit more about the strategies involved later. Anyway, let's see, the law, 857. A lot of this we already talked about. Oh, it's important to reemphasize the strengthening community banks and credit unions. Public banks must operate through local lending institutions, according to the law. Part of the reason the public bank is so efficient is because of cost savings associated with not having physical bank operations. So it's important to recognize that this is a collaborative thing, that the public banks are going to be collaborating with the community banks, which are not public banks in the same sense, although they serve public interest. They tend to be credit unions. So, yeah, this shows the extent nationwide of efforts at establishing public banks. And you can see it's quite extensive. The hurdles are many and high. We haven't really talked in detail about the hoops that any aspirant to a public bank charter is going to have to jump through in order to get approved by the state. So we'll be talking about that in a minute. Anyway, all of these states shown here are, to one extent or another, strongly considering the adoption of public banking. So the current initiatives to bring you right up to date: San Francisco, Alameda County, the North Coast, Los Angeles, Santa Clara County, San Diego. They are all working in one way or another towards a business plan, which would be the basis for the issuance of the bank charter. The bank charter is ultimately to be issued by the Department of Business Oversight in Sacramento. And before they're going to issue any charters, a number of conditions have to be met, including but not limited to rather daunting capitalization. That is to say, if we wanted to do a public bank of Sonoma County, we'd have to set aside many millions of dollars just to sit as the initial capitalization of the bank. And then the public banks will be subject to other kinds of restrictions that were initially adopted for private banks, such as what they call collateralization. In other words, the public bank will have to own assets, not necessarily monetary assets, but perhaps real estate assets or others, that will serve as the backing for whatever loans the bank makes. And the business plan will have to identify the extent of capitalization that is needed, and we'll have to identify the nature of the collateralization that is envisioned. These various localities are working in various ways on their own business plans as they endeavor to come up with ways. This is kind of a work in one, very much a work in progress. How do we, public bank advocates, how do we come up with business plans that will adequately address the regulatory issues that are part of AB 857? None of these localities has arrived at a draft business plan yet. They're still talking about what sorts of requirements or what sorts of skills and what sorts of abilities will be needed for the person or group that they hire to do the feasibility study, because that's one more thing that's specified by AB 857. Aside from all of these specific regulations about capitalization and so on, a feasibility study has got to be carried out in whatever locality is looking to establish a chartered public bank. So that's what these groups are currently doing, is discussing, working to try and find the best way to hire a qualified an analyst who would be, or group of analysts who would be weighing in on the feasibility, whether the given locality has any chance of manifesting a public bank. Now, in Sonoma County, we're kind of stymied by that because Santa Rosa is a small city and Sonoma County, population-wise, is a small county. There are various ideas for forming a joint powers authority with other Northern California counties, but they all involve so much political maneuvering that it's difficult to see exactly how that could take shape. The particular direction that we're looking in, that we locally, we of Sonoma County banking, public banking friends are looking towards, is to convince the supervisors and or the City Council of Santa Rosa or other city councils within the county, convince them that they would be better served by divesting their invested funds. And in the case of Sonoma County, that's $2.8 billion worth of investments that our county has parked all over the map with various hedge funds and municipal agencies and what have you. And these investments are subject to rather stringent requirements. They have to show a decent return on investment. And that's what the county treasurer is always concerned about most, up until recently at least. But now the county has taken a strong position against supporting banks that support global warming, private prisons, etc. And the thing is, in other words, the supervisors are already talking about divesting funds from these banks. But where are they going to put them? That's the big question. And that was already the question when Santa Rosa divested from Wells Fargo and moved to Chase. There are not an awful lot of financial institutions that have the capacity to handle the volume of funds represented by these $2.8 billion worth of investments. So if we could get our local boards, the Board of Supervisors and the city councils, to commit, to pledge to using a public bank as soon as one becomes available, and it could be in San Diego, it wouldn't matter where in the state it was, but to pledge to deposit significant amounts of that investment in those public banks. That then could serve the banks, could serve the advocates for the development of these banks as an argument going before the Department of Business Oversight, saying, look, we can do this because we've already got pledges of X millions of dollars from places like Sonoma County, City of Santa Rosa, etc. So that's our current strategy, is to work via the political process to get the elected elected officials to recognize that this makes nothing but good sense. And so therefore, not to do it. We need to save money because we know what we're looking at in terms of disasters that are facing us, the fires, the floods. We'd be stupid if we lost sight of that. How are we going to manage our response to those disasters? Well, it's going to take a lot of money. And therefore, if we're not making use of, if we're not availing ourselves of the possibility to save a lot of money via a public bank, then we're derelict.
So I would just add a little bit about San Diego. Shelley Browning, who's kind of been the lead person in Santa Rosa, she's been working on this for about 8 years. She said, oh, you got to mention San Diego. And she sent out an email. They're calling people. It says, City Council Budget Committee considers public bank resolution. So as Philip was saying, it's really critical. Most of this work has been done at the grassroots level. It's really critical now to get.
I'm trying to see because on the Zoom, I didn't have it on mute for some
support
reason.
this
I don't
idea.
know why they
And
had
some
it
cities,
mute.
some counties,
So-
are more supportive than others. But I think that's beginning to change. So it just says, it's time to have your say. Is Wall Street the boss of us, or should we take control of our own finances? Join us at Civic Plaza for the City Council Budget Committee meeting where they will discuss investing in a viability study for Public Bank San Diego. So it's happening, and at that map of the US showed, it's happening all over the country. And I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around it. Most people you talk about banking and their eyes sort of glaze over because it's not kind of a sexy topic, but it's huge in terms of the impact that it can have. This is what Philip was referring to in August. The Board of Supervisors in Santa Rosa passed this resolution to discourage investments in entities that seek to exploit, transport, or utilize fossil fuel reserves or other natural resources that contribute to climate change and planetary degradation, and investments are discouraged in entities that profit from the unjust treatment of refugees and immigrants, specifically around detention prisons. There was a huge protest about that. So this is really pushing the city and county. And again, it's coming from citizens saying, no, we don't want our money supporting these kinds of activities. So anyway, how to recapture our money power? Own the bank. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience.
This is that issue of Yes Magazine that has the wonderful article in it about the Bank of North Dakota. So get thee to thy local library if you're not already subscribing to the magazine, and find that if you're curious to learn more about the Bank of North Dakota. Also, there is a beautiful, wonderfully made documentary that's available via YouTube on the history and current reality of the Bank of North Dakota. So just go to YouTube and type in Bank of North Dakota, and you will be able to access that. It's about a half an hour long, and it's a very inspiring story.
Also, the website of the Public Banking Institute has got all kinds of resources. If you just Google Public Banking Institute, they have that little video. They have a number of other videos. It's quite a bit available out there. Any questions? Yes.
It sounds like the first thing we should do is mandate go to the city council and kind of where the supervisors and just get our 3-minute log in and talk about this. Is that a good idea? What else can we do? Vote somebody, sign something?
Well, definitely speak to the elected boards, because they need to recognize that this is not just a flash in the pan kind of thing, you know, floated by Shelley Browning, you know, for the first time, I don't know, 5 years or more ago. She's been working on it ever since, and you know, various of us have done exactly what you're proposing, and you get the sense that, you know, when you make these 3-minute presentations at the board of supervisors and city councils, often you get the sense that the elected officials aren't really paying attention. You know, you're getting your licks in, you're getting your shots off. But, what chance does it have to really affect their policy making? Well, I would say that it has a good chance as long as there are enough people doing it. If they get the sense that there are significant numbers of articulate citizens who favor this approach to dealing with our monstrous problems, I mean, that's what I have to keep hoping, is that as the problems get worse and worse, you know, ranging, I mean, the fires and the floods, the global warming results and all of that, this is going to be with us for the rest of our lives, and we're going to have to be dealing with it, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And yet these boards don't have a clue where the money's going to come from. They still talk about raising capital by taking out bonds or by selling bonds. It won't be enough, and those bonds will be very, very expensive. So, in other words, there's no future to that route. The route we have to take is one that doesn't cost so much. And that's what
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, talk to the councils and the boards and make sure that they know that there are a lot of people that are interested in moving this direction. Beyond that, I'm not sure if we have anything currently that we're doing a signature drive for. I don't think so. I mean, keep watching, stay tuned, and something like that will certainly be coming up soon.
We do have a website. It's Friends of Public Banking Santa Rosa. And we have met not only with the city council and some of the board of supervisors, but we've met with the Santa Rosa Budget Committee. And we've gotten mixed responses. Sometimes it seems like they're supportive, other times, you know, they've got other priorities on their minds. And I think between all the fires, Santa Rosa and the county have really been struggling to deal with those kinds of issues. And as Philip said, public banks could really help. But it's hard to get the kind of momentum. So I think letters to the city council members and to the supervisors would be great to say, you know, you heard a presentation on public banking and you feel like it's a really good idea, and why aren't they pursuing it? And also, I'd be happy to give you my card. We meet regularly if it's something you'd like to be involved in more actively. That's certainly an option. We used to meet regularly and had, you know, open it up to the public, but we've kind of focused our efforts on sort of smaller steps right now. We're trying to get different agencies, the cities, county, and other like the water boards and things like that to change their investment policies so they would legally be able to invest in public banks. So that's kind of a first step and sort of an educational step. And we're kind of thinking that it's going to be the big cities, San Francisco and LA, that are going to be first. Maybe Santa Clara County, because they've got all the Silicon Valley money. But so that if we could say, well, we could put some of our money in those banks until we could get something going here.
And again,
It sounds like rather than 20 people all going in one time, if we all just randomly went to our own city or the city on the county board of supervisors on a sort of random basis, so every time they hear it from somebody, that might have more impact than us all at once.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good strategy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give a shout out again to our intrepid member, Chris Petlock, who is the finance director of the Valley Water District, coming up with, I mean, his business is to deal with public funds and where to put them and how to switch them from account to account. He's doing that regularly every day. So he knows this, he knows the lay of the land, and he's very impressive when he speaks about it, simply because of his wealth of experience and expertise. So I'm hopeful about our chances. But the thing is, this is the sort of thing that typically gets the response, oh, you're talking about a long-term project. We've got more immediate priorities that we've got to spend our money on. I submit that in this case, looking at the sorts of environmental and social challenges that are presenting themselves to us, there is practically no difference between the short-term and the long-term approach. We need public banks. We need them as soon as we can get them. That's urgent. Otherwise, we can't do the things that the supervisors and the city council have already declared to be urgent. So,
there are some officials, elected officials, city council members, I think, up north that are actually asking for presentations on public banking. So there's other cities that are, you know, a little bit more motivated, and so it's a slow process. But I think as it gains momentum, that you'll see more and more cities, counties, possibly even states kind of jumping on the bandwagon. Any other questions?
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking like why I guess the different are not that excited about public banking, either in psychology senses. Is it because everyone has more money, because they're able to get more money, or is there a different reason why they rather go into the big corporate bank that sounds way more beneficial to
You mean why individual people or why the elected officials? Yeah. Yeah, I think they feel like it's an insurmountable obstacle. You know, I think they're sort of stuck in the weeds of, you know, we ought to deal with, right now, Santa Rosa is so far in debt because of all the fires and, you know, the things that have impacted their community. Yeah, that it's hard for them to think big picture when they're really stuck on dealing with these kinds of issues, and to think about, and like I said before, I think people's eyes glaze over when you talk about banks. It's like,
And
it's
when,
like,
and when people's eyes glaze over, they also lose sight of the fact that the existing banking industry has a huge phalanx of lobbyists who are pushing against this because, you know, look, if we adopt public banks in any kind of a large, on any kind of large scale, the mega banks are going to lose business. And so they don't want that to happen. And so they lobbied very hard against the passage of AB 857 last year in Sacramento. So politicians, to one degree or another, are subject to this kind of lobbying pressure. 857. Yeah.
What happens when, like, is it like people or organizations that do that give them idea of how to start it, or is it
it's allowing up to 10 banks over the next 7 years. So they're saying we will offer certificates to 10 public banks over the next 7 years. And it kind of spells out what the city or county needs to come up with in terms of a business plan. It's pretty explicit in terms of what's expected. But what it does is it kind of grants permission. It's like saying, okay, now you can go ahead and do this, and we'll give you a certificate that will allow you to operate in the state of California. Under the Department of Business, what is it? The
Department of Business.
Yeah, yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. One more.
Is the media hiding or censoring this? And second to that, do any of the Democratic Party candidates have opinions on it? And would it help to somehow get it into the arguments against each other? Because it sounds like something Bernie Sanders might be for.
He's totally behind it.
Yeah, he definitely has endorsed the idea of public banking, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about public banking as being a way to fund the Green New Deal. So there has been, and I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Warren is also supportive of public banks. I haven't heard so much from the other candidates.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think Buttigieg was in favor, but anyway, not an issue anymore. As far as the media coverage goes, the local newspaper, the Press Democrat, has not been averse to publishing letters to the editor and close to home columns. I had a close to home column. Deborah and I.
Well, actually, Phil did.
I did most of the work on it anyway. We had a close to home that appeared several months back. I have recently submitted a new one that they haven't responded to, and I'm afraid that perhaps their letters editor, whose name is Jim Sweeney, is getting tired of the public banking argument. You know, as though once you've made the argument, made your points, then you should just go away. But the fact is that we really need this, and until we get some action by our local officials, we're going to just back away and say, okay, there are more too bad.
And they did an article too. It's probably been a little over a year or two ago. They did an article about public banking. So it's been in there, but maybe not enough.
Now we need to find a champion. We found a pretty good candidate for champion in Chris Petlock, because he's really, I mean, it would have been great for him to be able to come today and state things from his professional perspective. But we need more champions. among elected officials, first and foremost, if we could get a reporter or two, or Jim Sweeney or somebody at the Press Democrat that really recognizes this is crucial. There's a need for this, and will speak out regularly in favor of doing something, then we'd be step ahead of the game. So we'll see. We're working on it.
Thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope it was interesting and worth your time. Thanks a lot.
Somebody else is supposed to be starting.
Is there